So if members are content to proceed through the agenda as follows. First of all, apologies. We don't have any apologies. So I'd move on then to declaration of members' interests and remind members that you're obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest before and during each committee meeting. So just check up. Does any member have any interest to declare?
No.
I'm thinking around official opposition. I sit on the Assembly Commission as well, Chair. So okay. Obviously the Commission are dealing with this, and AERC also. It's not a.
No, and I know similarly, but
yeah.
I know obviously as well, although I don't think this necessarily applies to anyone. It's also the case that a number of the recommendations that came in the report that we produced are also for the Procedures Committee. But note that obviously the interest in terms of the overlap with the Commission, Robbie. So I refer the members next to the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of October. That's at pages 6 to 12 of your meeting pack. Are members content with the minutes of that meeting?
Content.
Okay. So matters arising, I think, from perspective of the committee, we don't believe that there's any matters arising which isn't already on the agenda. But just maybe to ask members, do you have anything that you don't feel is covered by the agenda, which in terms of matters arising? Okay. So move on then to the next item, which is review of opposition entitlements. And obviously the Assembly gave the approval of the committee report. Now that's at pages, there's a briefing paper which is at pages 15 to 17. It's at point 5.1 on the pack, and has been prepared to inform the committee's consideration of the follow-up actions arising from that Assembly approval. So I'll maybe invite the clerk, just Shane, if you can speak on this.
Yes, Chair. So as you mentioned earlier, most of the recommendations, the procedural recommendations, will fall to the Procedures Committee to take forward, and the financial recommendations will fall to the Assembly Commission to take forward. There were 3 recommendations out of the 18 that fall to ARC. And I suppose really just an opportunity for the committee to consider how it might progress those recommendations before the end of mandate. Some of them relate largely to the next mandate, but there are areas of work that potentially the committee could progress in the meantime. So there's a proposal here for 3 separate pieces of research to be commissioned in relation to each of the 3. One each in relation to each of the 3 recommendations, and that would then inform the committee's legacy report to its successor committee in the next mandate. So I'll just go through them, Chair, fairly quickly. And of course, members may have identify other or additional actions as well that the committee could take in relation to these. So recommendation 3, page 15, the paper page 15 of the pack, was that the entitlements should be reviewed after a substantive period of operation, and in his review report, Trevor Rainey suggested that the Assembly may wish to encourage and facilitate research to help any future review, because that was a difficulty he came up against when he was undertaking the review, the absence or dearth of applicable research. So in setting out its position on the issue, on that review recommendation, the committee indicated that it would, up to the end of the mandate, give consideration to how best the Assembly might ensure that the related research would be conducted to underpin the future review exercise. And if members just refer to paragraph 11.9 of the paper, sorry, 11A of the paper, so there's a proposal that the committee commission some research to inform the next committee and to identify academics with suitable specialisms in parliamentary opposition, and then this committee could, in its legacy report, provide that information to the next committee and indicate that it may wish to engage with such experts when at the appropriate point in the future, and obviously that will be after that would be subject to an official opposition being established and after a period of time when the reforms would have bedded in. So that was the first proposal, Chair, in terms of review recommendation 3. Review recommendation 11 then was in relation to facilitating the creation of, that the committee would give consideration to facilitating the creation of political or technical groups, and the committee had stated that this would be something that could be undertaken in the next mandate. But if the committee is minded to do some preparatory work and to provide that work to its successor, there is a suggestion at proposal at 11B, which would be for, again, research service to provide a comparative paper on technical groups and political groups and other applicable legislatures. Trevor Rainey had identified the Dáil, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament as being relevant in that regard, and the research could also identify potential sources of evidence for the next committee to pursue. Then finally, in relation to review recommendation 18, which was regarding adequate access to information, that the official opposition would have adequate access to information from ministers and officials. The Trevor Rainey had outlined some potential options.
I was struggling to hear the clerk there at all. I don't know if anybody else is picking up, but struggling to hear the clerk there at times.
Okay, is that, for those on Starleaf, is that a common?
Yeah.
So yes, various people.
So I'll just raise my voice a bit. Is that better now?
I don't know much better.
Robert, what's...
Chair, it is better, but I think a number of the ones on Starleaf aren't on mute, which means that we're hearing their background noise as well as the background noise from the room.
Yeah.
So look, if you're not speaking, if you could put yourselves on mute, it would be helpful. I suppose just as well, if I can check with those on Starleaf, I know you're saying having a little bit difficulty hearing the. Have you got the gist of what's been said so far, or is there anything you want to reiterate? I think you're okay at that, but then if you raise your voice then. Sure.
So just finally then, the third recommendation that falls to this committee to take forward relates to the provision of adequate access to information for the official opposition, and Mr Rainey had identified some options in that regard, including protocol approach, and he had cited the UK Government's Cabinet Manual as an example, and also legislative provision. So the proposal for the committee to consider is that, again, research would be commissioned to examine how that protocol in the Westminster Whitehall arrangement, how that works in practice, and also in terms of any other applicable arrangements in other comparator legislatures. So it's essentially 3 pieces of research, a research paper in each of these recommendations to help inform the committee's legacy report to its successor committee to take forward in terms of implementation in the next mandate.
Yeah, and just to clarify as well on that, Shane, before just bring members in, the intention would be in each of these pieces of research for them to be completed, and indeed an opportunity for those pieces of research to be brought before the committee to be briefed on those in the remainder of this mandate. So we would have, if you like, completed tasks on each of those. Does anybody have any questions for the clerk? Just Kelly? Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to ask, obviously we're coming up to the end of a mandate. Are we content that Raise would have the capacity to deliver these pieces? I know we've got mentioned future or tentative future dates of the 19th of January, 9th of February and 9th of March, which contracts the amount of period of time that Raise can use.
Yeah, I have, Chair, discussed these with the researcher that would be undertaking the work, and they're quite content. I've also indicated the dates that with the expected delivery dates. So that's, and there has already been some work in the past done, for example, in technical groups. So it would be a case of updating that research.
If any other queries for the clerk? Paul?
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought I saw something. Everybody?
Yeah, I'm looking at my paperwork rather than the screen, so that's
sorry,
why
I think I spotted something on your screen. Maybe I thought it looked like you were indicating.
Cross-eyed. That's me cross-eyed.
Well, I was going to say it's just well Lord Morrow isn't chairing this, because he'd have taken about 4 bids in an auction by now. But
So just on the point about research, I have no problems with that. In fact, I think it's good that we would get research. The one thing about recommendation 18 that disturbs me a bit is the fact of if we're getting research with regards to an official opposition getting adequate access to information from ministers and departments. I think that we should also include in that research how MLAs from government parties will be able to access information from ministers and departments, because they would have a role also to play.
Is this a voice of frustration here by any chance? But
what can I say to that, Peter? So we all have our job to do. So access should be available to all MLAs. Whilst we recognise that an official opposition has a job to do, so does all backbench MLAs.
yeah, I think there's a good point there, though, that in terms of that research, it would be, I suppose, I would assume potentially indicate, and perhaps we can raise this with Reyes in that regard, is to what extent then any levels of access are applicable to all members, other than obviously those directly in government themselves. On that basis, I mean, you would think there should be a reasonable level of read across on that basis. Yep.
Just on the same issue, I would have thought that it actually there's a difference in terms of status. We'll say if you're either an official opposition or we'll say a technical group, as opposed to just all MLAs. Okay. And I don't know if this is exactly, we'll say, the same point, but it's broadened it out in such a way whereby it might even undermine the way we're attempting to achieve.
I think to be fair, where I think we've got the opportunity, this is if the researchers bring back the information as part of that, presumably, because I think from what I understood of what the clerk had said, some of this would be a range of options as to how particular things can be achieved to do that. We may, as a committee, take a particular view that, for instance, that either here are things which need to be cast widely across the board, or here are specific things which are required for, I suppose, at the initial stage, to ensure that we have the full gamut of information and options. I suppose really we could see what is brought forward by Reyes, and then as a committee come to a determination over, our recommendations as to what, because ultimately this will be part of the legacy report, as to particular the route map, if I can put it that way, for how, I think we all accept what needs to be achieved, but it's probably the how more than anything else would be the issue.
Well, I just make the point, in as much as that it's very much a common denominator whenever one talks, say, about the likes of the Fiscal Council and so on, the common denominator being what is the status in regards to their access to information? So that nearly it's the same point again too, being sort of expanded, we'll say, to all MLAs, as opposed to it being specific and dealing with the topic that I think we're actually dealing with here, in terms of the official opposition and or other technical groups.
Mm-hmm. I think if we can get the research paper back, and I suspect probably given circumstances, I don't know if in terms of the 3 dates those are effectively sequential, so that or whether it's a little bit looser than that, in terms of, for example, if we're talking about the 9th of March, would that be on recommendation 18, or is it just really whatever from the researchers, whatever they're able to produce first?
Sure, they prioritised the 18 recommendation 18 because that would be one that the committee might need to do a bit more deliberation and consideration
so
around.
So the intention possibly for it to be the January side of things. Okay. Okay. Well, I suppose again, if we get the research paper back, we can then see what actions we need to take as a result of it, and that may take us in slightly different directions. It may or may not be absolute uniformity of views in terms of the way, but I suspect there may well be certain things that specifically the opposition, official opposition, will require, but there may also be aspects of this which will also be, broadly speaking, more applicable to anybody outside of government, and particularly MLAs outside of government. Okay. In terms of the routes, of getting the 3 research papers? Are members content that that's a route that we take forward? And similarly, then they will report for 19th of January, we're meeting the 9th of February and the 9th of March. Just in terms of effectively the research paper for the 19th of January will be recommendation 18.
Yeah.
On the other 2 aspects, is there specific ordering?
Both for the 9th of February, Chair, because the last meeting is really a meeting to agree the legacy report, Chair, on the 9th of March. So
we'd aim to have the first one on the 19th and the remaining 2 on the 9th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on and to the next item of business, which is item 6, update on the other strategic priorities which have been identified, I think, before. So I refer members to pages 19 to 31 of the pack, and I'll invite Marie to speak on those.
Okay, the 3 strategic priorities, designations and the appointment of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, which was the first priority, committee effectiveness and collaboration, and gender and diversity imbalances in the Assembly and the Executive, which were both secondary priorities. In relation to the designations, the committee had commissioned research to identify expert witnesses in this area. 4 submissions were received, so at the last meeting the committee agreed to commission Raise to identify further expert witnesses. 3 have been identified and they're Annex A of that paper. So with Professor Michael Kerr, King's College London, Professor John Tong, University of Liverpool, and I just want to correct an error there. It refers to an article in the sort of middle of that paragraph where it talks about the Demographic Unionist Party. It's of course the DUP referring to.
That's how we're increasing.
Might be close enough.
Dr. Sean Haughey, the Institute of Irish Studies and the University of Liverpool. So the committee will want to consider whether it wishes to invite evidence from any or all of those.
Okay.
So at this
Also, before we open it up to Marie, I mean, maybe just because I don't see the particular controversy, we're happy to get written evidence out of the 3 academics.
so request.
That's what I was going to propose, actually.
That's
yes,
okay.
please.
Okay. So at the same meeting, the members agreed to forward details of other possible witnesses, but just I haven't received anything. So if you have any suggestions, there's still time to send them to me. The committee also agreed to seek the views of political parties and independent members on the issues being considered. 1 response has been received from Sinn Féin, and that's at Appendix B of the paper. Now, the closing date for responses has just passed. Perhaps in the next week or 2 we'll get a few more. Then the motion that was passed in the Assembly in October on the stability of the institutions, the motion calls on this committee to report on the outcome of its considerations to the Assembly before the end of the mandate. So that's something you'll need to consider, but one option would be to publish the evidence received from the expert witnesses as part of the end of mandate report, which of course is reporting to the Assembly. In relation to the committee effectiveness, the committee had been advised previously that the CLG report in this matter would be published in the autumn. It's now being confirmed with officials that it's not due to be published until the end of January 22, but officials have shared a copy of the terms of reference and methodology for the review, and that's at Appendix C. In relation to gender and diversity imbalances in the Assembly and the Executive, the committee had gone out to political parties asking for a progress report in relation to the recommendations that were in the 2015 ARC review report on women in politics in the Assembly. So 2 responses have been received, one from the UUP and the other from the SDLP, and reminders have issued. And the action plan, which captures everything that I have just covered, is at Annex or Appendix D of this paper.
Okay, I'll ask first of all, is any questions or queries for Marie?
Could I just go back on the 3 experts?
Well, Jim, if I bring you in a wee minute, so I just want to see if there's just any clarification being sought from Marie first, and then we'll sort of open it up and connect with that. Any? Okay, if not, then Jim, go ahead.
2 of them are from the same university. Indeed, are both of them from the same institute?
I'm not quite sure. One of them, I think, is more senior than the other. Both have been included because they were identified by research services. So it would be up to the committee whether it wished to take written evidence from the more senior.
Who's the more senior?
I'm not quite sure, but I know because I had raised the same issue with research.
But do we know, are we aware of them sort of effectively, bring in a wee second, Jerry, are we aware of them sort of collaborating with each other, or these, in the same way I suppose you could get at some universities, two different academics who will maybe pursue different paths in that regard on it?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, one, I mean, is down there is the Institute of Irish Studies. The other doesn't have that, but I mean, I could find out more information. I mean, or we could ask.
Look, I think from that point of view, I don't see any, again, subject to what the committee says, I don't see any great harm in getting simply, if people want to supply written evidence on that basis on it. I'm not quite sure, particularly if we're only talking about 3 academics across the board, of particularly curtailing that on that basis. So to take maybe a situation where we're having to choose between 2 academics is simply what information we get off them type of thing, maybe of a limited amount. Jerry, do you want to come in on that particular point? Or?
I may be looking at the wrong thing. Is it Annex A? Is that what the
Yes. Yeah.
So there's 3?
3.
But I think the suggestion because there's 2 from the same sort of unit.
Professor Jonathan Tong and Dr. Sean Hawhey.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry, but I thought there was 4 for some reason. I mean, it's all information. The question was put earlier on, is there any suggestions to have other expertise, and maybe that's the relevant question. So if anybody has any ideas of where to go for further information, and in fairness to, despite the fact that they are from the same university, I mean, it's all information we can reject or accept, or, you know, that's our job, I suppose.
Could I ask, Chair, is this voluntary submission, or are they being paid for their information?
Voluntary submission. I mean, we had sent out a request for written evidence from a whole range of experts that were identified. We only received 4, so there's no guarantee that all 3 experts identified are actually going to submit written evidence.
Again, I mean, I think from that point of view then, I mean, I would probably take the 2 points. First of all, I think being suggestion of 3, these, particularly if it's voluntary, I think there would maybe be more prudence point if we were paying a substantial sort of consultancy fee or something of that nature, but the fact it's free, we might as well take that. And similarly, I suppose, from the point of view of if they can feed into if there's any other names anybody does have, obviously maybe if they can do that within the next sort of short period of time in that regard. Okay. Just then move on to the other couple of items in relation to that. Obviously, as regards the committee effectiveness issue, as we're aware, if CLG is producing a report in January, then I think probably we should await what emerges out. There's no point in us trying to reinvent the wheel. And I suspect, to be fair, you know, I'm trying to use the word expertise without it coming across as being sarcastic in that regard, but one should feel that if there's an issue of committee effectiveness, that CLG is probably the people who are best placed to be able to at least provide a particular view on that basis. And I suppose the other point I would make, just in terms of the mentions being made, I think in terms of the diversity and gender priority, that obviously we've had responses from 2 parties. I appreciate there's been a reminder going out. I think possibly one area that at different levels sometimes a number of the parties seem to be poor at. We all take responsibility for this, as we've not, I think in this committee at times had enormous numbers of responses of parties. I think we should probably all collectively, from our point of view, try and encourage our parties to respond where possible on that basis.
Could I just ask on that issue, have we written to the Women's Caucus on this for their view? Because
we have.
All parties are there.
The committee carried out a stock take of all the work that was being done in this area. So it wasn't specifically in relation to the women in politics, because the recommendations were for political parties.
It's just, I know, for instance, that all political parties, I think bar Jim's, and people before profit are represented on the Women's Caucus. and that's where that sort of joint cross-party work happens to do with women.
I think from the point of view of it's, I suppose, to take Kelly's point in relation to that, because I appreciate that where we have sometimes a level of constraint, but I think this is probably within the bounds of that constraint. If our constraint is to get the political party's view on that, if there's a conduit where that is also done in a more collective way, I think where we would have a little bit of difficulties in terms of our remit would be if we were looking to groups outside of political parties, then that may slightly go to beyond where our terms of reference would stray. But I think if indeed this is a collective voice of those parties that are assembly based and directly speaking represented female members of the assembly, then that I think maybe something that we could do. Jerry?
It's just to agree with Kelly. I think it's a wise thing to do. I mean, let's be straight about it. The gender imbalance is against women, so we need to find out what they think about it, how well it's progressed. And I think, as you said at the start, Chair, we just need to get the other parties, which includes ourselves, to send in their view.
Okay. Are there any other comments in relation to the three? I suppose I'm trying not to maybe use the word secondary, but I suppose the three other strategic priorities. Anybody else have any other comments directly at this stage in terms of that forward? I think members therefore content to note the progress made to date under each strategy as outlined in the action plan. I'm sorry, yes, Kelly?
Chair, I was just going to say under point 9 there on page 20, I would be keen for any of the information that we have to be reported upon before the end of the mandate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we can take
I think from that point of view that would be then as part of the action plan, and so consequently I think if we're agreeing to that today, then it would be on the basis of whatever is brought forward then will be sort of put as part of the plan. Okay.
Chair, could I just seek clarification on something? Just in relation to the Women's Caucus, well, I mean, the request to the political party still stands, but just so that I'm clear, you're asking for an assessment from the Women's Caucus on how political parties have implemented the recommendations. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
As I understand it, Kelly, the Women's Caucus effectively represents more or less all the female members of the Assembly as a sort of broader collective group.
Yeah, we've actually
on that basis on it. So it doesn't go, from that point of view, it doesn't go beyond the political parties, and it doesn't go beyond female MLAs on that basis.
Yeah, so an assessment.
But it's just that they have already done work. We've done quite a substantial amount of work on gender and diversity and balance within the Women's Caucus, and it might be useful to have an update from them on the motions and what else has come forward.
Okay, we can, again, as part of that can... Okay. Move on then to the next item of business, which is correspondence. So to refer members to pages 33 to 34 of the pack for correspondence from Clerking and Member Support Office regarding member development on personal security. I think that's largely to note in that regard. There will be, the PSNI will be facilitating an online session on personal security on the 15th of December from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. using Microsoft Teams. So just again to bring us together, I think a number of committees have brought this forward. So any member that wishes to sign up for this session is asked to book a place by email through Gavin Irvine within the CAMS office. Okay, move on to the next item, which is AOB. There isn't on the agenda any other item of business that I have. Are there any items of business that any member wants to brace forward at this stage? Notwithstanding, obviously, there's a range of things which will be coming forward. If not, then advise members that the date and time of the next meeting will be on the 19th of January. Indeed, we have the meeting scheduled for the 19th of January, 9th of February and 9th of March. And therefore, as I said, it will be at 12:40 again in room 29 on the 19th of January. Okay, I adjourn the meeting.
29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern